right, hello everybody. Welcome to OpenHour. My name is Stevie, and I'm so excited to have a number of really exciting faces here joining the conversation tonight. Tonight's OpenHour is on transparency in environmental policy and science. And this came about from a number of conversations that have been happening around Public Lab, both online and offline, just for the need that people have to basically understand science as it happens and policy that affects them related to environmental science. So a lack of transparency has brought about a lot of this from in writing, whether it's in jargon or whether it's just in the terms that we use to communicate with each other that make a lot of these things clear. So, and then obviously weeding through all of the information to find what's important for all of us. So that's kind of where this idea started, and the way this will kind of work is I have a very loose set of prompt questions for everyone who's interested in participating in, but basically this is an open conversation about transparency in environmental policy and science. I would like to introduce a couple people here that we highlighted out that were going to be here. And then also we'll just go around maybe in our respective locations and say where we are and just, you know, names of who's calling in and who's with us this evening. So I'd like to first introduce Catherine, you're first on my list, Catherine D'Ignazio. Catherine is a Public Lab organizer. Works with MIT, Media Lab, and also Civic Media and the Data Visualization Department at Emerson College. So I just wanted to give a shout out to you. Thanks for coming. And also Mark Meisner. Did I say your last name correctly?
Yes, that sounds good, Stevie.
Great, thank you so much. Mark is the Executive Director of the International Environmental Communications Association, and very glad to have you with us this evening.
Thanks for inviting me.
Hopefully here in New Orleans, we're going to also be joined by Professor Bob Thomas, who is the Director of the Center for Environmental Communications at Loyola. So either he'll hopefully pop in online or here in person. But maybe if we could just go around to the people who are online and say hello and where you're calling from. And then we'll also should give a nod to those who are watching online, and will ping into us on the chat page from the OpenHour page. So Effie, you're next on my list here online. Do you want to say hello and where you're calling in from?
Can you hear me?
Yes.
Great. I'm Effie Greathouse, and I'm from Portland, Oregon, and I have a PhD in ecology and run myairsample.org and think transparency is really important.
Great. Gretchen, you are next on my list here.
Hi, I'm Gretchen Turkey, and I am the data ambassador for Public Lab, and I'm in Durham, North Carolina. I also think that transparency is crucial for any sort of environmental progress on a massive scale.
Excellent. Jeff and Boston Group, you're next on my online team here. Are you muted? Okay.
What is Tom?
We can't quite hear you. If you want to type in who's with you, we can do an online intro that way. But in the meantime, I'll pass over to Liz.
Hey. Hi from New York. This is Liz. We have a number of people here. Here, speak up really in a loud way.
My name is Mark, and I'm interested in wood smoke and pigment matter analysis. And
Hey, Mark.
I do a lot of water quality research, considering water and work
It's a little hard to hear, Liz.
Oh, okay. So that was Mark working on particulate matter and air quality from wood smoke. Imond working on urban watershed reconstruction.
I'm using Citizen 311 data to recover urban data patterns.
And using citizen phoned-in complaints to recover data patterns in the urban environment. And Jeremy?
From Wikipedia, and this is my third or fourth OpenHour.
Yeah, Jeremy Barron from Public Lab and also Allied Community Wikipedia. Great help in New York here. And Bronwyn.
Organizer.
Yes, an organizer here in New York, and we were working on prototyping the plant kit today. And that's who we have here. Although I see Tom Levine, who may also be in New York.
Yeah, you guessed correctly. Yeah. Hi.
Hi, Tom. Scott.
Hey, I'm Scott Eustace. I'm the wetland specialist for Gulf Restoration Network. We're a wetlands advocacy group, and I guess I'm concerned with transparency because wetlands are really important to keep New Orleans afloat and sheltered from the storm. And there's lots of rules involving wetlands, but a lot of people don't know about them. So.
Excellent. And then around here, do you want to go ahead and say your name and what brought you here?
Libby Cornell. I'm in Bob Thompson's environmental education course here at Greathouse.
Okay, did you guys hear that? No.
Something about environmental education course?
Yeah. here in New Orleans, Professor Thomas, who's hopefully joining us, teaches a course here that I think a number of us have run through. Clay?
I'm Clay. I'm on staff at Public Lab. I'm a state teacher. I study biology at Greathouse. And I'm an intern at Waterworks, which is the creation of lessons on flood mitigation and water pollution.
Great. And we have a couple more here. Sorry.
Hi, I'm Rachel Guillory. I work at Ocean Conservancy for our Gulf Restoration Program, and my role there is to try to figure out how to communicate about the whole process of restoring the Gulf after the BP oil disaster. There's also a lot of rules on how that works and how that money gets spent, and it's very wonky.
And another one right there.
Hey, I'm Noah. I'm an adjunct instructor in physics at Loyola and a grad student in July in the physics department, where I study alternative research.
Did you guys hear that? No. Yes, some. Noah with Loyola and Tulane, and physics, physicists, energy. Yeah, alternative energy. Great. And then let's see, Boston looks like we have Katie, RJ, Will, Doogie, others, Ted. A group from Boston. And then just checking out online as well. So far checking in on IRC, typing in. We have Becky from Portland, Jeremy, and Ben Gamari looks like, and Martin D, a couple other people. So if you're watching from online and you're not in the live hangout, feel free to type in questions and comments, and we'll make sure that they get into the OpenHour live call.
Don Blair on the telephone, linked to Skype and Google Hangout.
And Don Blair.
I want to say hi.
Great.
Come on. Just a shout out to my homie Ben Gamari in Germany if he's really out there. Hi, Ben.
Okay. Great. Well, thanks everybody for joining and for saying hello. And I guess what I'd love to do is kick it out first and see if anybody has any good questions or conversation topics to get the ball rolling on transparency and environmental policy and science.
Yeah, that wasn't effective.
Was that New York? Mark, was that you?
No, I was going to say, I think that I don't want to drag it out too long, but I think that we might want to sort of just clarify what we mean by transparency, because in some ways, transparency can mean, access to the data, and in other ways it can mean the ability to kind of understand the data, kind of accessibility of the language and that sort of thing. And I'm sure both of those are important issues, as you all know. So I don't know, maybe people want to jump in and start by saying what it is about transparency that's most of interest.
Great. Somebody want to weigh in?
Anybody?
I personally think that both are really big issues. As far as access to the data, I have been surprised at how much data we technically have access to that I didn't realize. But there's no way to really know that you do have access to that data. A lot of things that are available somewhere deep in the EPA, like myriad websites, that you just don't actually know is publicly available. So, so in some ways, I think it's even more important to focus on communication of the existence of the accessibility of the data.
Yeah, totally. I mean, yeah, there is all this data out there, but somebody has to find it and I don't know, I'll use the term translate it, if you will, make it accessible, put it into a format that's going to be, at least somewhat user-friendly.
Yeah.
So I've been thinking a lot about this right now. So I teach data visualization and really data journalism in a journalism department at a communication school. We've done some modules with Don and the Open Water Project around using sensors to collect data about water. And I think we don't have enough conversations just generally about data literacy. And we don't have even really a good definition of it. It's something I'm really interested in working more on. But thinking about it's about access, but then it's also about background knowledge and context. It might be about learning how to connect with the people that can help you make sense of the data. It might not always be that everybody will know how to make sense of everything, right? You could show people some thermal, remote sensing images, and they might need to be highly trained to really interpret those. But sometimes it might be really about connecting with others who can help you do that. But I feel like it's like a conversation about data literacy and how we impart those skills. Because one of the things Don and I ran into when we were doing these workshops in my class is just how much background knowledge we needed to be giving people in order for them to make progress on a really kind of simple sensor that was measuring conductivity. But all these questions come up of well, are we measuring water quality? No, we're measuring this one very specific parameter. We're what does that mean? And how do we need to know a lot of contextual information about that particular river and that particular watershed? Do we need to know some kind of baseline parameters of what the conductivity normally is? So it's just the complexity. It gets complex really fast when you're dealing with sort of novices working with data. So I guess I'm interested in, because I'm interested in public lab, which I feel already does this, but how do we build collaborative knowledge structures to make those translations more effective and productive and hear from different voices and not always the super expert people?
Am I expected to answer that? I mean, I think I'll say something. It's immensely complex and difficult, and I think the first question you have to ask is, what are we trying to do with this data? What's our end goal, right? Is it part of a campaign to get some policy put in place or to change some sort of local ordinance, or just to have something cleaned up, or So what is the end goal? I think is a really key question to ask. And then working back from that, if you're thinking about doing a campaign or whatever, you have to work backwards in order to determine what kind of data you need in what format, because you need to know who it's going to be for. Right? If you're trying to influence policymakers by influencing the public and the community, then you have to make that data somehow interesting to the people in that community, and that may take a major translation. And speaking of visualizations, I think visualizations are incredibly important, but not necessarily simply just graphs of the data. There've got to be better, more interesting ways to kind of make that meaningful to the people you're trying to reach.
Scott, can I ping you in here on the note you posted on the chat? You're on mute.
Well, yeah, you were talking about data visualization. The reference to, there's all these kinds of data, and you spend a lot of time learning about how to contextualize them. And I guess in my world, where we're looking at lots and lots of wetland permits, which are, the government regulates development of wetlands, which protect us. But they issue thousands and thousands of permits a year, and people don't even know about it. So, I mean, the first step we thought in trying to contextualize this for people is to put it on a map. And I know there's probably a lot of people in public lab world, that are sympathetic that this is like the most rudimentary way to contextualize something really fast, maybe too fast. But so I just put a link to all of the wetlands permits, and so that way, if someone is very new to this idea of what's going, they can at least try to look up their neighborhood or what's going on in their neighborhood. So that's all I had in response to like some a previous comment that very quickly context becomes extremely important. And so, I don't know. I keep running into the idea that these two-dimensional maps are a way to get to context really fast.
Yeah, I think everybody understands maps.
Most people, yeah.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
Actually, I think that map literacy is really, now that everybody has Google Maps and on every device that they own, I think that map literacy is really increasing a lot faster than literacy of any other sort of data platform in a lot of ways. So I think that, mapping things can be really, but how to map that.
Data is also not just a static product, it's one that changes over time, and it becomes significant when we can take data sets and compare them with each other over time. So you were just mentioning wetland permits. One of the data sets we can use in New York is we just had massive floodings of the shoreline, and the minute you overlay the old map showing data of where the old wetlands were and relate it to the flood line, people immediately connect with the importance of why that data set is important when you can draw that line on the map where the historical wetland was relative to the immediate cost to their basements and damaged furniture. And so the minute you can relate data to time patterns, I think it's really important. Because static images are only static images. People want to see four-dimensional change patterns over time. That's very important for transparency.
And you're relating it to their personal, direct experiences.
Yeah, I think that point is huge. And I think Scott mentioned that too, of maybe a use case for this map that he's showing us would be that, you would look up your own neighborhood on this map and kind of see, well, what's going on in my vicinity that I know really deeply and I care really deeply about. And I feel like that is kind of the what's in it for me of the map, because often maps can be somewhat overwhelming with just the sheer amount of data that they're displaying. So a good way to make it personal and present to people well, the things that you care about, here's how you find those and locate those on the map. I think that's really effective. The BBC actually had this awesome series called Dimensions, where it would show, like, it would overlay geographic things on your own personal geography to show you the scope of something. So, like, if there was flooding in Pakistan, for example, it would overlay the area of the flood onto your location. So for me, that would be overlaid onto Boston, and I would be able to see that this flood in Pakistan stretched all the way from New York City to Maine. So the scope is huge, and I don't really understand that on a map of Pakistan, but I do understand it on a map of a place that I kind of know with my body. So I thought that was a really, like, those kinds of ways of making it personal and contextualizing it to the body in a way are really helpful.
I'd like to chime in. This is Effie from Portland, and I'm looking at the wetlands map that Scott pointed us to and think it's absolutely fabulous. But I look at this platform that it's on and the URL that that he has to point us to it, and I'm really interested in thinking about how SEO, search engine optimization, and getting into search results in Google can be used to increase transparency and think about how is a person who isn't plugged into public labs and who may be out there and thinking a little bit about wetlands in Louisiana and just Googling a little bit, what could be done to get something like this up into their search results so that really this picture of the issue gets to them before maybe something else that's high in the search results that doesn't paint so much of a picture gets to them.
I mean, I feel like this is where the media really comes in, and, like, kind of clever and savvy media production, both from the part of journalists, but in a way also media, I don't know, framing by activists of things for the media also comes in, and, like, messaging. I mean, so that's why I'm just very interested in how do we teach about these things to people whose primary role will be media makers, because I think this issue of visibility is huge. Because if you could get this map on BuzzFeed or something, like if you get it on a platform that has a lot of viewers and viewership, it instantly reaches so many tens of thousands more people than it does sort of published in the wild like this. But SEO is also another super interesting, thing where, like, if you search for Louisiana, how do you get this map to the top of Google? It might be a little bit more complicated because you got to get a bajillion people linking to you. So it's like you already have to be viral. But I think that's an interesting proposition of, like, how do we reverse engineer these systems of distribution of information to make this kind of stuff as common.
So, Scott, what are these permits for, all these wetland permits that are on the map?
These are all, and it's messy, I know. This is just something I slapped together. We have to talk about this all the time. But Kate Gruth did this as an intern for me. But wetlands are a shelter, and these public notices come out where the government is asking people in Louisiana if they have any information on these areas and the environment in these areas, and if they have any opinions on whether or not whatever project it is, there's a lot of oil and gas, of course, because it's Louisiana. I think over half of these are oil and gas, and most of them are oil pipelines in some way. And do these, and so people are, the government is putting these notices out and asking for comment, but no one even knows that the government is doing that.
Yeah. No, it's a very typical. It's right. Like in the Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy. The papers were filed in a filing cabinet in the basement, guarded by a tiger, sort of thing. I'm curious. So these are permits, obviously, for development projects that are going to impact wetlands. So they're basically getting a permit to destroy part of a wetland, right? And so, are you? Do you have a kind of campaign going around this? Or are you just trying to raise awareness with the public? I mean, I know you don't have to explain to me the reasons for protecting wetlands, especially in the Gulf. But is there an end goal to this project?
Oh, well, I think we'd like to support the government regulating wetlands. There's a lot of talk in our state and across the nation about how environmental regulations just kill jobs and they're totally unnecessary. We also have,
If I may, I can try. I'm used to explaining this to people who don't know anything about wetlands.
No, you don't need to explain wetlands to me. I just want to know what they're.
No, I mean the specific process. Okay. It's Scott. As I understand it, most of your job is to look at these permits and do the Army Corps' job for them because they don't actually review the permits the way they're supposed to. And so when there's a permit that looks like it might be doing something dangerous, bad, Scott notices this in the public notice document that he gets about the permit, and he tells the right people and stuff. And then I was also thinking,
we're an advocacy group. We try to encourage the government to follow their better angels, and then sometimes we have completely new information that the government doesn't have, and we disagree with the government, and we end up in court about it. All of which to say is we try to use this process to lower impacts to wetlands, which we know are really important. And then, of course, there is a huge effort to restore wetlands, and often. Well, not often. Well, a few times a year you'll get, the permits for wetland destruction on top of the wetland restoration. And so we're trying to make sure that happens less, or not at all, really. So I guess that's the campaign, I guess you could say.
And getting back to this isn't a direct response. Getting back to the discussion of
it's kind of a typical tree hugger kind of thing. I think there are many. I have many colleagues who have this kind of advocacy position across the country of the United States.
We had some ideas on how we might spread this the data in that map.
I guess in the course of engaging with this process, I learn a lot. Because we're submitting information from people from all over. We also might need to ally ourselves with people that we never knew before, because we might have to go to court against the government if we disagree with them. So it's a communication tool for reaching out to people, and it's a communication tool for letting them know what powers they have, and then hopefully out of all that we save some land.
I have a kind of a question that might take this in a little bit different direction, but I was wondering, when we're talking to people who are new to some of these ideas and questions, whether it's in New Orleans and we're talking about wetlands loss, or we're in, we're dealing with the fossil fuel burning industry in our backyard, and the topic of risk comes up. And I think it's a really, it's a hard thing, because now it's not just the environment, but it's people. And I was wondering a little bit about what people think in terms of the ways that we should communicate clearly and effectively about risks in a real way, but also a way that is approachable for people to wrap their heads around, I guess. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
Some nods. Does anybody want to think on that?
I can jump in. I don't want to hog the space, but I'm happy to jump in. I think that, again, if you're thinking about communicating risk, you have to think, what is your end goal? I'm going to keep hammering away at this. What are you trying to accomplish? Because simply raising awareness without having a goal that you want to accomplish beyond that can lead people to feel frustrated. It's called well-informed futility. They learn well-informed futility. Can you hear me okay?
Yeah. No, yep.
So if you're getting people concerned about something, but you're not giving them a way to address it, then that's not necessarily a good strategy. And the other thing about risk is, I think there's a broad assumption out there that if you explain the facts to people, if you educate them about what's going on scientifically with an issue, whether it's wetlands or fossil fuels, climate change, there's this assumption that knowledge leads to action. And it's actually not true at all. And the research shows that sometimes it's quite the opposite. So one of the things that I think people engaged in citizen science need to think about, along with people in communication, is how much do you want to communicate risk and how much do you want to try to communicate the science versus communicating other things like solutions and actions, because sometimes the more science you pour into it, the more disengaged people get because they feel either disempowered or they feel discouraged, or they simply hunker down into their kind of group identities. So this is something that really isn't, it isn't always the right way to go. Just for example, with climate change, the more you communicate the science of climate change to Republicans, the less they believe in it, because they're so ideologically committed to their group identity, and their group identity says we don't believe in climate change. And so pouring more information into that doesn't help. That's the best example I can think of.
Do you want to jump in, Lauren?
Sure. Yeah, I don't know how many of y'all are familiar with state extension services or Sea Grant extension services, but I think when we talk about communicating risk and helping people understand risk without freaking them out or making them kind of identify in their group, a lot of extension services do a nice job of this. In Louisiana, we have a really great map that they present that overlays the current flood map zones, explains what those flood map designations are, and then they also might still have a layer for the new proposed flood limit or flood levels too. And so it was kind of a very non-political way to communicate how risk was increasing by how just FEMA is changing how they look about risk. And when you go to the Extension Service website, they also link you to a lot of educational tools. So, but when we see this presented in the media, I think they try to scare us a little too much. That's what, when you pick your allies in communicating ideas, you're like, yeah, we really need to get, media to catch on to this. We need to get this on BuzzFeed. There's still, there's some value in not, I guess, keeping things a little unpolitical and maybe not too sexy. I don't know how to keep things unsexy and still get people to read them. Still trying to figure that out. You guys have any ideas on that? So I was particularly kind of appalled by that recent article about how the Pacific Northwest is just going to die. It's just going to fall into the sea and explode, and there's nothing we can do about it. But if you actually look at some of the resources available through King County and some of the governments, they have a really nice job of breaking down the geology of, like, if you live here, you have a much better chance getting through this earthquake than if you live there. So that's what's missing when we see these kind of sensationalized ideas about risk and how we deal with risk. So.
Yeah, that's
I helped run a canoe club on a Superfund site here in Brooklyn called the Lawrence Canal Dredgers. And
can you come closer to the microphone?
It's a heavily polluted water body, and as a result, a typical question is, aren't you crazy going out on a Superfund site contaminated water? And the answer is, the water is only as contaminated as what's underneath your kitchen sink. So whatever it is that you poured down the sink is what ended up as a diluted version in the canal. So the rat killer, the pesticides, the cleaners, the detergents that have accumulated there are a direct action of what you chose as a consumer every day. And then people will connect to the fact that the reason the canal is all filled with foam is because they use a particular brand of detergent. And so if you can relate it to a direct action and then say, listen, a cleaner canal means your kids have a nice place to canoe and your property values go up. And so there's a direct relationship between risk and personal action that you can translate in clear terms, transparent terms that have a direct impact on something people can deal with, on not running the laundry on a rainy day when those detergents will go into their immediate canal.
You're talking a bit about focusing on positive outcomes rather than risks, and I think that's important.
Well, risk reduction is a positive outcome, so that's the key. I mean, people don't want to be scared. They don't want to look at things they can't solve. Things that you can't solve, people don't want to pay. Right. And so you really do have to present the data in a way that can be broken down. It's not just some unsolvable Rubik's Cube. It has a key set of steps that you can take to get from A to B, and present the data in a way that is allowing for action. It's not just data for the sake of data, it's data for the purpose of the plan.
Yeah. But you're framing it as a progressive step, as something good that can be done, rather than as something bad that's happening.
I think that's really interesting in light of this. I think that emotion, forget what you called it, Mark, but where you're sort of, I think I've also heard it called learned helplessness in the face of, overwhelming sort of complexity and like, what am I going to do about this?
Well-informed futility, I called it.
Well-informed futility. Yeah, that was a good phrase. So I think that's a really interesting counterpoint to that is some of the things that are going on in journalism right now. There are conversations, it's being called solutions journalism and advocacy journalism. And increasingly people, the journalism has a kind of, it's sort of, I don't know, its received wisdom is that it's objective, right? I mean, it has this kind of similar thing to science of like, we report the facts and nothing but the facts. But increasingly that is being challenged in journalism and media, and journalists are looking at ways to basically combat exactly what you guys are talking about because of the need to report on these kinds of issues and actually offer people up alternate solutions. I guess all I'm saying is like it's becoming more okay as like a media producer, I think, to be articulating solutions and giving people pathways towards action, and I think that's a really good thing.
Yeah.
I'd like to kind of throw it a little bit back to just back to the risk factor, because I think that actually is really intertwined with general data literacy, and I'm wondering about how to properly convey the uncertainty of any data. And it's one thing to say count like the number of permits, like the number of permits, there's no uncertainty in that number. But if you're talking about any sort of water chemistry parameters or predicting matter in the air, anything, you have your instrument uncertainty, you have like the variability or like the factors involved in whatever environmental study you have, and there are all sorts of levels of complexity of how well you know that data, and that information needs to be relayed so that you're not a boy calling crying wolf, and that that the capability and the limitations of the data are properly disseminated with that information. And I think that's really an important piece of all of this, both for people themselves to understand, and then also when you're trying to advocate with that data so that you don't look like a sensationalist.
We have one here.
Yeah, I was wondering, so I ran to this, and this may be, when you get to the end of this, you may think this is like a niche, like, first world problem, at least in the space of like science communication, but you can stop me at the end. I was like in a disputation, so to speak, with somebody the other day online about, say, is ocean acidification a real problem or not? And I was like, well, I know people at Stony Brook who research this. I can put you in touch with, even if the methane class rates go, there might be a problem, right? And he goes and he looks up some fact sheet at Woods Hole, and it's, it's very well presented from the put in kind of facts in terms of infographics and large quotes and whatnot. But they took all the references and they totally abstracted them in a totally other part of the website, right? So it looks at this fact sheet. It's like, oh, there's no references. This is all just they're pulling this out of anywhere. There's no big deal if you're shifting ocean page from like 8.2 to 8.0. That's still basic, and it's like that may be like a first world problem in that somebody actually cares about the references. But like, what would be a good way to kind of like incorporate? I mean, in some of these more popularly focused like treatments, right? There's no even place to even look at the references. So I'm just wondering, maybe you guys some of you are wizards at like science communication. Like, how do you kind of like buy credibility with some of these people? I mean, I know that's maybe again a first world problem, but like it's certainly something I would bring up the examples of my computer. It just died. So I mean, you can see online where I was getting.
I don't think there's any shame in including references. You can do it in different ways. Hyperlinks if it's online, right?
Well, they totally abstracted to another portion of the website, right? Which I thought was right. I mean, that's their design choice. But,
yeah.
I mean, I guess there were lots of.
But it's not like a PDF file, right?
No, the fact sheet is a PDF file.
Okay, so it doesn't have the.
No, yeah, they didn't put them in the PDF file.
Yeah, I don't know. I was going to say, I think it was Gretchen was talking about uncertainty. If you're doing climate change communication, there's a handbook that just came out from the Climate Outreach Information Center, which is a group based in the United Kingdom, called the Uncertainty Handbook, A Practical Guide for Climate Change Communicators, which might be useful to look at. So if you just search online for Uncertainty Handbook, you'll find that.
Cool. Thanks.
You're welcome.
Right. I think it was the fourth report that was was it the AR4 climate change report? The first time they actually took the statistics and then had a standard way of describing how uncertain or certain they were about different conclusions. So they linked language to statistics.
Yeah.
That was awesome. And I've seen some other talks that relate the way science goes about proving things and comparing it to the way the law talks about evidence and preponderance of evidence versus beyond a reasonable doubt. And a scientist might relate those two concepts back into numbers. And then also graphic, I guess coming back to graphically, I've often seen things, faded out. If there's a certain color that indicates something on a map, if it's uncertain, then it might be like kind of grayed out, as if to say, we think it's this, but there's something that makes it more uncertain.
Well, and as all of you, I'm sure, know, uncertainty has been used by the climate change deniers for 2 decades to stall action.
I was wondering, one of the things that we were talking about originally here, and it's sort of carried on as a theme through this conversation, is the use of maps in talking about data and environmental data. And I think that we've all kind of identified how maps can be useful for people in terms of talking about what's happening on the ground in a way that's understandable. But I was wondering, what are people's experiences or thoughts on other forms of data communication? What else works and makes sense to people? And not only that, like you also talk about maps as a reference to like popularity, I guess. Like they've been used a lot, and I'm wondering what else is coming down that we can communicate to people about with data.
I'm working right now with the New York City Department of Transportation, and they're moving a lot of their old-fashioned maps online into the little smartphone screen so that people can look at them in Google Maps and Street View. So they want their data to be plugged into Street View as people are walking down the street looking for the restaurants and to look up the menu that they want. They also want to be able to have the traffic data plugged in there. And one of the key references that we're using is Waze, where people type in congestion ahead, police action, traffic, and one of the key directions that we're looking in for the way map communication and data transparency is going to happen is public participation and interaction. So everyone has these new mobile media devices that are de facto mapping devices, and the accumulation of those are creating the new map that people look at on a 30-second basis, on a 20-minute basis. And the whole big challenge for us as map makers is the scale and speed of the data has changed, and we need to sort of adapt our whole way of looking at data in one that's more fluid and faster, and to look at it in one that's more participatory.
If it's just about participation then, or not just, but if that's another facet, then I wonder, do people have experience with, like, you know, apps or something where you can submit to say, hey, you know, I'm smelling something today, or I'm not smelling something, like things that can identify with other people's senses or experiences, other than, like, other ways that we can check in a participatory way that don't involve geographic mapping. And
there must be, aren't there? I mean, our city in Syracuse here in upstate New York, there's an app where you can take a picture of a pothole or something like that and send it to the city. I mean, there must be some environmental group that's created an app like that for toxic spills or something.
Yeah, let me chime in here about, I also work with the Louisiana Bucket Brigade on their implementation of Ushahidi for their pollution reporting system. So it's at eyewitnesspollution.org, and it allows community members in Louisiana, as well as people across the United States, can report to it, but it's really focused mostly on Louisiana, to report when they see a lot of flaring at the refineries, or they're smelling odors in their neighborhood. However, it's still sort of map-based, because it really seems like that's the powerful way to sort of visualize even that data, and that comes from the original software of Ushahidi implemented it as a map originally.
There's also a project, it's a little bit less environmental related right now, but I know they want to go in the direction of environmental sensing, but out of the MIT Center for Civic Media, called Promise Tracker, that the idea is that it's publicly participatory infrastructure mapping, and in particular it's designed to be like an accountability piece of software, so that when a politician makes campaign promises, like they say, I'm going to build like 70 new schools, or I'm going to add like 5 fire trucks to the city, or et cetera, and things related to infrastructure, that people can go out and participate in sort of monitoring whether that actually was delivered and what the status is and things like that. And I know that it's not released yet, but I know that they're experimenting with this idea of people wearing sensors on their body attached to their mobile phone somehow to also be monitoring air quality conditions and things like that. So I feel like that stuff is in the works. I think that eyewitness pollution example also is really powerful, like this idea of kind of if you had both a monitoring, like a sensor monitoring network, and then kind of combining that data with an eyewitness or felt data by many people reported at the same time, I think that can be super interesting.
I'd like to maybe... Oh, Scott, is that you?
Well, yeah, I mean, at the plant, when something goes wrong, there's a siren, right? So there's a sonic indicator that the workers need to leave the area. But it's often been the complaint that towns, especially African American towns next to the plant, they don't get any notification of what that is. But anyway, that's a system, I guess, that the data turns into a sound, which tells you what to do. you know, and if you hear the air raid siren, then you kind of know that something is wrong. And so I don't know if, you know, that Ushahidi platform, maybe you could have something, you know, it would have to incorporate like the geographic information, but maybe if people start smelling bad things all at once, all in the same place, maybe there's some sound that they get over their phone or something that tells them that, hey, other people are smelling this too, and you should probably leave.
Can we ping in Don Blair on this one? Are you there, Don?
Don Blair here, yes, present.
Don. You want to?
Yes, just speak up, Don. Can you guys hear him okay?
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah, go ahead, Don.
Yeah, it's funny because I was just thinking trips with people historically before, I can remember before GPS on a phone. You know, there would be the person who is particularly good with reading the map. You know, like there was a map, it was quite legible as a map, and you'd think that if you just presented this map to any citizen who happened to be in the car, that they would be able to interpret it and navigate. But it turned out that that was not the case, and there was always like, you know, my friend Bob, who was like that's the map guy who's like just particularly good at it. And I was thinking that because I was also thinking earlier about my sister who works in a health clinic, and she's a nurse in a health clinic, and there's another nurse in the health clinic who is the one who really tries to stay on top of the literature as it comes out that's relevant to the kinds of issues that they see in their health clinic, and will periodically summarize the papers that have come out and you know, kind of lead these folks through the studies that seem like good studies based on the way that they were done and the methods, and the studies that were sort of questionable. And I guess I'm just thinking that like a lot of times when we're talking about these issues of transparency around data, we're imagining either experts or like people who don't know that much about the issue at hand as sort of atomistic individuals who need to be presented with simplified data or like pre-digested, interpreted data. And it seems like it's really, I think what I'm hearing in some of the conversation is it's really hard to interpret some data in some context. You need a lot of background. So this is just taking me back to something that Catherine said at the outset, was what are those intermediate structures, like the person in the car who's good with maps, or the person in the clinic who is interested to take the time to review the literature? What are those, like, who are those people in communities that can serve as the kind of interpreter? Because I think I'm just increasingly skeptical that a platform with annotations, with like crowd annotations, is really going to effectively serve that role. It's what I'd rather have is an individual in my community that I trust, that I've developed a relationship with, one way or the other. You know, around, you know, they're someone that I know stays on top of these issues, has a relevant background. It doesn't have to be a scientist. It doesn't have to be someone associated with an institution. It could just be somebody who's competent. But I've learned to trust their opinion around this. I just wanted to throw that out there as an idea. Like, what are those intermediate structures? What do they look like? Maybe they happen online, but they're more structured than people upvoting or downvoting things, or just, you know, throwing out a random comment. But you want to know, you want to be able to trust the voices of interpretation that you're hearing. And I guess the critique typically is that that trust usually comes from credentials, but instead of credentials, there's something. You trust them somehow. Anyway, that's what I've been thinking about.
I also wanted to, put you on the spot there as well, because one of the things that we were talking about here in terms with other senses as well is, I love the anecdote that you have of people's experience with the Cokie, and the way that, you know, and for those of us who don't know what the Cokie is, maybe you could give a brief intro, but explain a little bit about your experience with people understanding the information that it's giving.
That's a kind of example that's been prominent for me and for Catherine as we've been working with it. And I just got back from Columbia working with that, and it's a device where the idea is it sort of translates the conductivity of water into an audio signal. So when the conductivity goes up, the pitch goes up, and when the conductivity goes down, the pitch goes down. And the issue with something like conductivity is that in particular contexts, it can be an indicator of, say, contamination from a fracking operation, and it's been used in that way. But in general, it's without knowing context and other things that might be impinging on water quality. It's mineral water, very healthy mineral water, could give you a high conductivity in the same way that fracking fluid could. So you really need to know other aspects of the scenario in order to interpret this signal. But when I was in Colombia and I was demonstrating this device to folks that were living in an area that was impacted by mining pollution, you could see that the temptation was when we saw that when we heard actually that the audio, the pitch of this device was very easy to interpret, very easy to take in data. When the pitch of this device went up higher for the river water than it did for the bottled water, I just saw a lot of heads in the crowd nodding, like, right, yes. Now we've got a way of detecting the pollution that's in the water, and how do you convey that it's not as simple as that? There are useful things that you can do with this device, but how to mitigate against misinterpretation. Is that what you're thinking of?
Yeah, and I just thought it was really striking the first time we had that conversation here at Propeller. It was, I love the way that you described how when people heard the pitch go up, they just automatically knew that the conductivity was increasing. And I thought that was a really interesting anecdote, just in terms of if someone's not there to explain the data to you, what is one way that you can understand a little bit about what's going on? So whether or not it's related to environmental health, it almost seems like we're innately built to understand things a certain way, which is something that I just kind of found interesting. But I want to.
That's another good point. Yeah.
I want to. I see there's a couple hands here, but I do want to ping in here. We're almost up on the hour, and I always promise that we'll mark off the hour. So that's just to say that we will say thank you to everybody who has been here and joined and participated in the conversation, and I will keep the line open for those who wish to, continue and carry on. But just as an acknowledgement to everybody who's come tonight, I've really appreciated everybody's input and everything, and so thank you. But also, just before we go, one of the things that we do like to do is compile resources that are on this topic. So if we wouldn't mind just going around, and if anybody has any ideas on resources for helping people on this topic in dealing with transparency in environmental policy and science, whether that's data communication or helping people weed through jargon, I'd love to compile those before we sign off here, and then we'll carry on the conversation for those of us who want to stay. But I'll add the first one, which is unfortunately a gentleman who was hoping to be here this evening but couldn't, Seth Shankoff, and I'm sure I butchered his last name, who's with the Physicians, Scientists, and Engineers group. And one of the things that they work to do is to sort of translate policy and science and make it on their website a way that you can access a paper that's been written for example, and have it written in a way that's more understandable for people to know what's actually in it, and that could be important to them. So I'll ping over to them and a nod to some of the resources that they've helped to make available for us on this topic. Does anybody else have ideas on things that we could add to this list?
We have quite a few resources on the International Environmental Communication website. Some of them are only available to members, unfortunately, but you can connect to quite a few without a membership. But it tends to sort of orient a little academically in the communication side of things. But I'd be happy to help anybody who wants to contact me directly through there find some other things.
Great, thank you.
I'm going out tomorrow to do water quality testing, and we have a New York City water quality testing map called the Water Trail map, and then it has the data that's collected by local citizens, volunteers by site, and it's mainly geared towards dispelling misconceptions about water quality. So it's just data that allows people to have arguments about what's the most polluted site. And surprisingly, the most polluted sites in New York City are not the Superfund sites, they're the local duck ponds, where the kids fishy splash and the dogs go poop, and they have 10 times worse water quality than anything in the Superfund site. And then that starts an interesting discussion about what is risk.
Do other people, oh, Mark, I think you're on mute if you were talking.
No, I was just going to say, yeah, totally. Yeah.
Yeah, something. I find that like the most important thing is often that something looks cool when you're showing it to people. The information content is not very important, and I found that people seem to enjoy when, well, data or whatever are presented in the form of music videos or as food. So I have some literature on this. I don't know where to put it, but
okay. If you actually put in any link on the IRC chat page or on Twitter, I will compile all the links at the end of the talk. Also, Effie, I saw that you wrote in here. Do you want to talk about this eyewitness pollution?
Yeah, I wanted to add in that Louisiana Bucket Brigade has a lot of participation in the eyewitness pollution reporting system, and a key part of that is that they have this fabulous ground game for community organizing and going door to door to train people how to use this tool, rather than assuming that if they just put it up online that people are going to find it and use it. So they really reach out to the community and recruit community members and students for doing that kind of work to bring it to people, which I think is sort of an example in itself of working to make this tech tool more transparent.
I guess I would also bring out here, I should have said this before, but for those of us who are new to Public Lab, reaching out across the Public Lab lists or on Public Lab is also a resource if you're trying to understand something, related to any of the topics that we have Google groups on, or just in general, is a resource. Did anybody else have resources that they'd like to share? And also, you can put them on either chat that you're on with us. I know there's two going, or say them here, and I will compile them if we don't get to them live call.
The University of Maryland has a really great website. I think it's Integrated Application Network. IAN is the acronym, and they have some really good resources on communicating science in general on various things, like whether it's reports or white papers or a poster session. And they also have a huge database of icons of various like fish species or seagrasses, or here's a diagram of this watershed. And so that's always handy for fact sheets and PowerPoints and what have you.
Great, thank you. Catherine, okay, I see a couple pinging in here. I will post all these up. But again, thank you, and feel free to ping them in here, and I'll put them all together. And I just wanted to say thanks for those who are leaving us now, but I will get back to the questions that we sort of breezed over when we said our quick thanks. So I think there was one from online, or please?
Matt in the chat room asked, when you're talking about the Cokie, is it public labs position secretary, the person who communicates? Is that?
Can you all hear?
Can you hear me?
No.
Sorry.
Do you want to come over here?
Yeah.
Okay.
So I was saying Matt in the chat, asked if it should be public labs stepping up more to fill that gap between scientists and communities. When it was being talked about, people will get lost on the data, but you need the data. So who's going to fill that role? But is that us? Should we be doing more of that? And if so, how do we do more of that? Thanks, Matt. And then he slapped me in the chat room. So,
high five?
No, it was a slap. I'm very offended.
Is that Matt P?
Yeah.
I know you're out there. Yeah, great question. Is that public labs role? Well, I guess I would ping in there that we're all public lab. You know, we're all here. So is it our role to help communicate and translate? Yeah, it definitely is. But the other thing with public lab is, you know, people participate in public lab in the ways that they can, and you know, if you see yourself in a position of being able to communicate about things that you know about effectively, then that's a good space for you, and we're here to help you share that. So absolutely.
I might say one last thing, and then I'm going to sign off to put children to bed. But I love that question that y'all just brought up, and yeah, I think it definitely is in the various contexts that we work in, the responsibility of public lab. I mean, such as it is. Although since public lab is a, you know, network, like it's not like it all works in some kind of massive sort of hierarchical way. But just to offer one of the things that we're working on, Don and myself, Liz and Becky of Public Lab, along with Mark Green at Plymouth State, and yeah, that's all of us, are working on a project called the Environmental Storytelling Institute. And so this is, we're applying for like big grant funding. We're trying to get an NSF grant for it, but this is an experiment to actually very consciously bring together journalists, scientists, and community stakeholders and community organizations to put them in dialogue with each other, to learn how to use different kinds of public lab DIY environmental monitoring tools, and to also just kind of learn from each other and influence each other about what their different ways of knowing and what their different concerns are. So it's like one kind of step in being really intentional about who we're bringing together and what kinds of structures could most facilitate knowledge traveling across these different, you know, professional boundaries or expertise boundaries and things like that. So I don't know. Hopefully we'll get funding. See what happens.
Keep coming back in. I see my little icon jumping, but I'm not reading. Can't pull it up right now. Great. Did anybody else have comments, questions, ideas, ways to change the world? Yes, come.
Well, I don't know. Whose job is it? I mean, certainly I have part of that job working for an environmental advocacy group, but a lot of times it's the government's job to communicate this information. And sometimes there's even this, there's the Ag Center, right, the outreach. There's, in the United States in the 30s, there were a lot of RC&Ds, research on conservation and development outreach, where the government went out into communities and did things like, you know, what nonprofits do now. And then, you know, often we're trying to push the government to make the industry communicate a lot of information about what they put out. So I mean, everybody plays a different role in a different way.
Clay?
So for me, with some of my real-world questions, because I've taken on social media for 1.5 organizations, I have a few barriers. One is that I don't want to make it too flashy, and then it's like it doesn't seem like science. But I also don't want to make it just numbers and like really boring graphs. So I'm struggling trying to figure out where that middle ground is. That's one side of it. And the other side is I actually just don't even know how to find the people like within the internet world when they're not there yet. Especially like public lab it's a little bit easier because we have a lot of internet presence, but for Waterworks, my other organization, there's a tiny presence. So I'm like, how do I get those people initially? But then also I don't know how to present it either as like a social media biologist. Yeah. 2 questions there. And I've just been thinking on it, and I don't have any solutions yet. So, yeah.
How do we find Waterworks online?
Oh, here, they're asking you questions.
It's waterworksla.com, and the site it needs improvement.
Yeah. So I've for a really long time since I did social media outreach, but what was really helpful for when I was doing that, Clee, was to find organizations that were doing similar work and message them directly and share what I'm doing with them directly. Even if it seems like you're begging to send a journalist your website and be like, check out what I'm doing. Sometimes I will, and sometimes they'll then put that online. Like, there's a couple of kids I went to school with that work for BuzzFeed now. So, occasionally I'll send them things. I don't know if they ever read them, but on the off chance that they might. You guys have my email address. You can send stuff to me on the... But I think that's a really important thing that we think about when what's that intermediary that communicates for us? It's all the other advocacy organizations that maybe are more focused on a particular issue, like air quality or water quality, than this broad idea of collecting data like we are in Public Lab. So I think you need the allies, you need friends. It's really important for media outreach. Anyone else has anything to add? You're welcome.
Anybody else? Anything?
No, I think everyone's tired.
We're good. That was good. All right. Well, if that's all, I think we'll say goodnight, and we're going to wrap up some pizza here.
Good night.
Yeah, good night.
Good night.
Good evening.